The topic I'm presenting is how Fairfax County residents voted in 1861 in the statewide referendum for Virginia to secede from the United States. I'm going to cover where the voting locations were, people's experiences in voting, the vote results, and post-vote consequences. What you're looking at in the first slide is a detailed map of Fairfax County made in 1862. So let's get an idea of Fairfax at that time. In the 1860 census, Fairfax had a population of 11,834. To contrast that with today, the Eagle Bank Arena at George Mason University can hold over 10,300. So you can imagine the arena full of people spread across the 250,000 acres of Fairfax County. In the 1860 presidential election, Fairfax cast 1,467 votes. We'll compare that to how many votes were cast in the 1861 secession vote. So what I'm going to do is highlight events in a timeline to the secession vote in May 1861. The clock starts ticking in November 1860 when Abraham Lincoln wins the presidency. By February 1861, the Deep South had voted themselves out of the United States. This image of Lincoln was taken in March 1861. It was just before his inauguration, and by that time 7 states had seceded. At that time, Virginia had held a secession convention, but refused to secede, pending further events. Further events developed. After South Carolina seceded, it claimed the forts protecting Charleston Harbor belonged to South Carolina, not the United States. On April 12th, Fort Sumter was attacked, and due to its having limited supplies, the fort surrendered the next day. The federal troops were evicted. On April 15th, President Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteer soldiers from all states to put down what he termed the insurrection. On April 17th, Virginia decided it would not take up arms against its southern brethren, and leadership of Virginia seceded the state out of the United States. On April 20th, Robert E. Lee resigned from the U.S. Army to side with Virginia. He had grown up in Alexandria. He honeymooned at the Ravensworth Plantation, one of the largest properties in Fairfax County, and he lived for a time in Arlington overlooking the Potomac. So he had local ties. This image of Robert E. Lee is from 1851. I couldn't find anything from right before the war. For Virginia, Lee was a catch. In the Mexican War of 1846, he had won recognition and promotion. He had surveyed and engineered forts across the country. He'd been superintendent of West Point. He knew the capabilities of a large swath of all the officers in the United States Army and Cavalry. The United States government did not want to lose Lee, and it offered him a high rank in the Army before he chose to resign. On May 9th, Virginia became a part of the Confederacy. What you see here is from the newspaper in Richmond on May 10th. This was actually on page 2. Now, all this happened without the approval of the voting citizens of Virginia. While their approval was highly likely, it had not been obtained. An after-the-fact referendum vote is scheduled for May 23rd, 1861. What would happen if the citizens of Virginia voted down secession? The stakes are high. This brings us to the secession vote in Fairfax County. Fairfax County had 6 voting precincts, each with at least 2 polling stations. This map I hand drew based on other historic maps. Each red star is one of Fairfax's 14 polling locations. Starting at the northwest, you see Drainesville, and then south of that, the John Ross home along the Loudoun County line. Further south, you see Centerville. Then across, you see Sangster Station, which was on the Orange and Alexandria rail. Over to the right, you see Arundel Shop at present-day Burke Lake Road and 123. Note that that one is still standing, but it is a private residence today. Fairfax Courthouse above that, and if you go further north, Lydeckers on Church Street in Vienna. Then over to the right, eastward, you see Lewinsville, Falls Church. South of that, you see Annandale. East of that, by Alexandria, you see West End, which at the time borders Alexandria. Today, the West End area is near where the railroad crosses Duke Street. Further south, you see Pullman's, Accotink Post Office, and Bayless Store. Three of these locations still stand today: Fairfax Courthouse, Lydeckers, and Arundel's. I want to briefly touch on how the districts were legally described in Fairfax County records. This map shows District Number 6 highlighted, along with the voting sites circled in red. District Number 6 was the easiest voting district to delineate. Here's the official description from the records. Quote, beginning at Difficult Run on the Little River Turnpike, down Difficult to the Potomac, thence up the Potomac to the Loudoun line, thence with the county line of Loudoun and Fairfax to the Little River Turnpike, and down said turnpike to the beginning. And we established the places of election for said district at Drainsville and at the house of John Ross on the Little River Turnpike. As mentioned, 3 voting sites still stand today. This is Fairfax Courthouse today. It's had several additions since 1861. So next we'll look at actual voting records. This is an image of the top of the voting tally sheet, page 1 of the Fairfax Courthouse poll. You can see, I hope at the top it says, the Ordinance of Secession. The overall vote for Fairfax Courthouse was 151 in favor of secession, 8 in favor of not secession. In the for ratification column there on the left-hand side, the first name is Alfred Moss. Alfred Moss was the county clerk. Ferdinand D. Richardson is the second name in favor of secession. He was the assistant court clerk of Fairfax. On the right, in the for rejection column, you see the name Henry T. Brooks. Dissenter Henry T. Brooks became county clerk for Fairfax when it was under Union occupation. The Union only wanted people loyal to them to be in positions of responsibility. This is what's known as Lydeckers today. Today it's known as the Freeman Museum and Store. This is exactly where the secession voting was held for Vienna in May of 1861. Now, voting was performed out loud, not in secret as it is today. Your neighbors, nosy people, thugs, everyone knew who you were and how you voted. Now, on the 150th anniversary of the vote in Vienna, they held a reenactment of the event, and it can be found on YouTube. The Lydeckers Freeman Store is located on Church Street. If you go there today, they have a bookstore in the basement, a gift shop on the main level, and a museum with period furnishings and artwork on the second level. This is the actual first page of the secession vote at Lydecker's store, representing Vienna. Many residents in this area came from the north. The final tally for Lydecker's, aka Vienna, was 44 in favor, but 78 against secession, representing a majority of locals against secession. This is where the voting at Charles Arundel's took place, where the vote was 69-1 in favor of secession. Please note, this home is private property, so please do not disturb. This is the first page of the secession vote at Charles Arundel's, where the final tally was 69 in favor of secession and 1 lonely vote in favor of rejection. And you see some old-time Fairfax last names here, too. For example, number 2, Charles Arundel. Number 3, Fairfax. And if you just look down the list, you see many, many historic Fairfax names. You can understand why people voted in favor of secession. Virginia was founded in 1609. For over 160 years, its residents and families were Virginians. Only for 70 years were they United States. and many felt that states' rights were a foundation of the Constitution. Many voters across the state owned slaves, and they influenced others. And Virginians felt an affinity for their southern neighbors and did not want to take up arms against them. So why did people vote against secession? For one, due to low land prices, there had been an influx of Northerners, and they brought with them their Northern bias. Some were Quakers, and they would vote against secession out of fear of war. Some were abolitionists. Some realized that secession would bring war to Fairfax' doorstep, which it did in spades, literally, for the troopers dug up the county. Some others just felt that the United States should not be broken up. And then there were those that felt and knew that the North was so much stronger than the South. For example, William Beckwith, a War of 1812 veteran residing in the Union Mills area. He was at least 75 years old in 1861, and he did not vote. But he was quoted by one of his former slaves as having said many times that the North were able to whip the South with sticks, that they were 4-1. And he was not alone in that sentiment, that the North was much stronger and would defeat the South. This artwork was in Harper's Weekly of June 15, 1861. Harper's had a national circulation of about 100,000 at the time. It's titled, How Virginia Was Voted Out of the Union. In a way, the image was true. You see a bayonet sticking out of the no window and a smiling face in the yes window. But the intimidation did not change the overall result. Intimidation did prevent some votes from being cast. In Centerville, which voted 100% in favor of secession, John Hart of Centerville did not go to the polls. He said, quote, because of threats, unquote. Falls Church resident John Lynch headed to the polls, but he and several others left without voting when one of the election officials told Lynch that if he voted for the ordinance, he, quote, would be regarded as a traitor, unquote. In Vienna, Josiah Bowman did not vote, quote, because we were threatened, unquote. In Accotink, William Smith did not vote. He was told, quote, by a rebel that if I voted against the ordinance, I would lose my property and perhaps get greased before I got home, unquote. In Drainesville, Benjamin Brady and Howard Lasher voted against the ordinance. A secessionist named William Day told Lasher and Brady that he would, quote, mark them, unquote. Intimidation was not limited to one voting district. These and other sworn accounts are from across Fairfax County in the Southern claims after the war. Many told tales of being threatened at the polls. There were, as well, several irregularities in the voting record. I'm going to talk a little about voting irregularities. This is one. The Bayless polling location unanimously voted in favor of secession. However, there were 4 names against secession that were crossed out and placed into the, quote, for ratification, unquote, column. The vote commissioners wrote that the men changed their votes, but no explanation of the men's motivation accompanied that. These images are from the actual voting record document, which shows the names of the persons for rejection having been crossed out, quote, by the desire of the voters, unquote. This image from the voting record shows another voting irregularity. These votes were received under protest. Quote, the annexed names of Fairfax Cavalry, commanded by Captain M.D. Ball, have been received under protest because of having voting on the Ordinance of Secession in Alexandria, Virginia, May 21st, as a company. Mottram Ball, the captain there, he came from the Lewisville area. And again, you see names here that are known in Fairfax County history. Ball, number 2. Ball, number 5. Have you heard of Ballston? Those are Ballston balls. Arundel, number 7. Kinchlow, number 9. All kind of Fairfax history names. You even see one guy who's a member of the military voting against secession. And you can see how it's crossed out as if they said, "Hey, Faulkner, are you sure you voted against secession?" And then Faulkner even confirms it, and he's like, "Yeah, I voted against secession." Spoiler alert, Fairfax County voted 3-1 in favor of secession, with 1,231 votes cast. This slide shows the results of the vote. In some locations, such as Centerville and Bayless, there were 0 votes for rejection. 3 districts, however, had a majority of vote for rejection of secession. You can see Accotink, Lewinsville, and Lydeckers voted by a majority to reject secession. But otherwise, except for Falls Church, each site had only a handful of votes against secession. At the bottom of the list, the last line you see is the local volunteer cavalry incorporated into the final result. Now, statewide, the referendum passed by a vote of 6-1. And once again, in Fairfax, the 1860 presidential election had 1,467 votes cast. In the secession vote, less than a year later, and something more important, one might think, there were 1,231 votes cast. This could hint at voter intimidation of Fairfax residents. Immediately at 2 a.m. on May 24th, the U.S. Army, cavalry, and artillery crossed the Potomac to occupy eastern Fairfax and Alexandria. This event is shown in the woodcut image which was printed in Harper's Weekly. That same day, May 24th, 1861, diarist Anne Froebel of Wilton Hill, which was near Franconia, wrote that the turnpike southbound was clogged with neighbors, quote, "vehicles of all description, filled with women and children, and men on horseback and on foot, a continual stream." This image shows a farmer planting under a Confederate flag and soldiers reaping under a Stars and Stripes flag. The title is "One Man Sows and Another Man Reaps." What it says is that in the spring, the Confederates had control of the land in Fairfax, and in the fall, that land was in Union hands. And then the Army was reaping the farmers' fields, and the crops fed Union soldiers and Union horses. Little of the benefit of his hard work, if any, trickled down to the farmer. Here's some stories about the war ebbing through Fairfax County. Thomas Pullman had a farm south of Alexandria near what is the Huntington Metro Station. He voted for secession. On his farm, he had a distillery. It was destroyed to prevent drunk soldiers. And then Fort Lyon was built on his farm, and Union troops pulled down his house for the fort's construction. James Purdy of Annandale voted against secession, and he encouraged others to do so. The local Confederate authorities seized nearly all his personal property. He was further stripped by Union soldiers who stole 4 horses, harnesses, and a large wagon. Starvation in Fairfax County was a real concern. Larders emptied quickly, and people couldn't get passes to leave despoiled areas because they were between lines. Ann Murtaugh lived 2 miles from Centerville. She claimed rebels took her whole 20-acre crop of corn in 1861. And she wrote, quote, "I was once told by a Confederate soldier that my blood would have to answer for my Union sentiments. I told him it was none of his business," unquote. And then Robert Coleman voted for secession at Drainesville. During the December 1861 Battle of Drainesville, the Coleman house was hit by 11 cannonballs, and 2 exploded. The house and furniture was nearly destroyed. They left the day after and returned home after the war. Their house was totally gone. He wrote, quote, "No, not a particle of it, not a piece of it," unquote. We saw earlier how Fairfax Courthouse looks today. This is Fairfax Courthouse in 1862, occupied by Union soldiers all about it. I estimate about 20 in this photo. Federal occupiers of the Fairfax Courthouse Aside from stealing Martha Washington's will, which is a separate story, they left graffiti in the court log. This one regards a promissory note from Uncle Sam to Jeff Davis on the debt of treason. I'll read it to you. Quote, Fairfax, June 23rd, 1863. 20 years from date, I promise to pay Jeff Davis and crew one debt of treason, which is now credited to them. Signed, Uncle Sam. Unquote. These images are some of the voting records. They are today held by the Fairfax County Circuit Court in Fairfax City. During the war, many records were burned, scattered, or stolen, so it's easy to think that with the vicissitudes of war that these and many other records would be lost. But they were saved. Jonathan Roberts was a Quaker living in Accotink. He voted against secession, and during the war scouted for the North, guiding Union troops through the roads and cowpaths of Fairfax County. One of his stories, and he had many, was the recapture of the voting records. When the Confederacy abandoned Fairfax, Alfred Moss, the county clerk, boxed up all court records and quietly hid them in the Warrenton courthouse. Jonathan Roberts, through his connections, found where they were and obtained a military pass to go get them and rescued them from loss, then made copies of them. And he writes, by getting the poll book, he saved the government many thousands of dollars that would have been paid to the rebels. And he further says, quote, and I have had to bear many a hard name from the rebels for bringing that poll book to light. Unquote. 6 years after the war, Congress allowed wartime Union sympathizers located in southern states to apply for reimbursement for damages incurred during the war. What you see here on the left is an image of the filing binder for James S. Purdy, who lived in Annandale at the start of the war. James S. Purdy voted for rejection of the secession resolution in Annandale. He had a 145-acre farm along Little River Turnpike. He filed a claim for loss of crops, fences, livestock, and his home was burned down by Union troops early in the war to prevent it from being used by Confederate sharpshooters. In addition to witnesses swearing of his loyalty to the United States, he was on record as having voted against secession. What you see here on top is a section of the Annandale secession voting record showing Mr. Purdy against. And below it, the summary disposition of his claim, where he claimed $8,559 in damages and was awarded $2,873. Sorry for the wall of words here, but I'd like to wrap up the presentation with before and after. Reading the before slide, the author Frederick Law Olmsted toured the South in the 1850s and later designed acclaimed public parks across the United States. Fairfax was described to him as thousands and thousands of acres had been cultivated in tobacco and were abandoned as worthless and became covered with a wilderness of pines. These lands had been purchased by northern immigrants, the large tracts divided and subdivided and cleared of pines, and neat farmhouses and barns with smiling fields of grain and grass in the season salute the delighted gaze of the beholder. In consequence of the above altered state of things, schoolhouses and churches have doubled in number. This was in 1853, 8 years before the vote, but you can see that Fairfax was pretty well off at the time. By 1865, there were over 100 forts, military camps, and fortified works across Fairfax County. This slide shows the 7th New York Cavalry installation at Vienna. This image shows the Henry House on the Manassas battlefield, how broken down and torn up it was. This house was only about 2 miles from Fairfax County border. So with that in mind, I'm going to read to you how Fairfax County was described immediately after the war. The scene was one of desolation from Alexandria to the Bull Run battlefield. Observers from June 1865 remembered that a few decrepit houses and leaning chimneys were all that remained around Fairfax Courthouse. The local men, with their homes ruined, their families beggared, and themselves humbled, drew the sympathy of the more fortunate city dwellers. Throughout northern Virginia, fences are utterly swept away. Occasionally a small patch of corn or wheat is passed, but the whole face of the county is changed. Today, there are a variety of historic markers found across Fairfax County recognizing and helping to interpret historic Civil War military locations. In addition to these markers, many road names bear historic Civil War significance and names. We've seen descriptions of what the war did to Fairfax County after the secession vote, and we've done a before and after there. This is a before and after of Robert E. Lee. During the war, Lee wouldn't sleep in residents' houses. He feared the North would burn the house down in retribution if the owner had provided lodging to him. He would pitch his headquarters tent on the front lawn of a house and work from there. These photos show him in his prime with a dark mustache, and then just after the war ended, gray and white-bearded, but with a commanding look. To close, I'd like to present you with a before and after of President Lincoln. He was attacked on all sides constantly by the press, political enemies, generals who were allegedly smarter than him, and others for 4 years. He worried for the country the entire time. The war took a toll on Fairfax County, and you can see from the lines on his face it took a toll on Lincoln too. Thank you very much.